What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Saturdays in Stores podcast on the Crossover Media Network. My name is Kanaye Tesoro, and I know it's been a little while, I want to say 2 or 3 weeks up to this point since a video has gone up on this podcast on the channel, just considering that there really hasn't been much to cover in this offseason for UConn basketball. That is until kind of, I guess, the reason why I'm making this video, because of the murmurs we've heard around people who both cover UConn, as well as what Jon Rothstein noticed in his sit-in in one of UConn's practices, along with what Dan Hurley said in his most recent media availability. I want to say going back almost a week now at this point. Now, basically, that's what the bulk of this video is going to be, just talking and breaking down the things I've heard from both Hurley in his media availability, what Jon Rothstein had to say about the practice he sat in, as well as just some other notes that kind of come to mind. Just breaking down what, in terms of what I've heard from other people who cover UConn. But before we get into that today, if you like this podcast or anything else you see on the Crossover channel, please, it goes a long way if you engage with our videos in any way you can, whether it's just liking our videos, subscribing to our channel, or telling other people about the channel. It goes a long way continuing to build what we do here at the Crossover. We've had a really good month of July. You know, me and Josh want to come out personally, thank you guys for the super strong month we've had in viewership. It's really amazing. It's still not a lot as much as some other channels you might see on YouTube, but compared to where it was when we started, it means a lot for me and Josh to see how much traction this channel is beginning to gain over the course of when we started covering college basketball. So it's really awesome to see. And from the bottom of both me and Josh's hearts, we'd like to thank you all. Encourage you guys to keep it up, keep going strong with the viewership, the liking. We love seeing your guys' comments. You keep throwing them out there, definitely fun to see. But let's get right into it and start with what Jon Rothstein had to say about the practice he sat in at UConn. He came out and posted a quick clip, I want to say about like maybe a minute at most, on his Instagram and his Twitter. He also tweeted a few of the main takeaways that he noticed. I think the first one that's most notable is what he had to say about Brilen Mullins. This goes for also what Dan Hurley had to say. He said that Jon Rothstein came out and said that Brilen Mullins looks every bit the part. His basketball IQ is amazing. Immediately, great knockdown shooter, which is what Brilen Mullins was advertised as being, what most people consider as the best shooter in this incoming freshman class. So that's definitely good to hear, just considering that's what we thought we're getting. It seems like that will be what we end up getting with Brilen Mullins here at UConn. On top of that, Hurley, in his media availability, came out and kind of said that he could definitely see Brilen Mullins being in a role where he's kind of a secondary ball handler alongside the likes of Silas Demery Jr., who will be the starting point guard. I'm going to touch on him probably later in this video. But going back to Brilen Mullins, having him as a secondary ball handler alongside Silas, solo ball, Malachi Smith when he's on the floor, then I think that's going to be great. All of the great Dan Hurley UConn teams have had multiple guys who are comfortable handling the rock, can make the right reads, can make passes, play make for others. That's what kind of Hurley alluded to, where he was saying that it's not just the shooting. Of course, the shooting is what comes off immediately when you're watching Brilen Mullins play, but it's also the playmaking he provides. He's a comfortable ball handler. He also mentioned that Brilen is sneaky athletic, which I do think I did kind of tend to notice in some of his high school basketball tape. He is coming from Indiana, so that's a very prestigious basketball state. So he's played against some good competition up to this point in his basketball career. Was a McDonald's All-American. And I do have to say, I've seen a few nice dunks he's thrown down from his high school tape. And it seems that Hurley's alluding to him being able to do that at the college level too, which at least we hope. But on top of that, he also noted that Brilen brings a level of toughness and kind of leads Dan Hurley to believe that he's the guy that's going to be able to guard. And Brilen Mullins brings solid length and size at the wing spot. He's around 6'5", 6'6", I believe. A little bit of a slighter frame, which is, I've been vocal about my concerns regarding that. Just the physicality Big East play worries me slightly if Brilen is in a huge role for this UConn team, which I know he will be. It's just a matter of if he's in that starting lineup or if he is coming off the bench as the 6th or 7th man. I definitely think it is encouraging and good to hear that Dan Hurley believes that Brilen's going to bring a level of toughness, going to allow him to guard and really bring tenacity and energy on the defensive side of the ball, which is something that this UConn team lacked completely this past year. I think all around, everyone on this UConn roster should be a much better defender than they were last year if they were with the program. If not, I think we brought in some very talented defenders too, like a Malachi Smith and a Silas Demery Jr., Dwayne Caroma, Alec Melender. Those guys, I think, are going to be able to guard at a high level. But I definitely think super encouraging hearing all the praise that Brilen Mullins has gotten for both Jon Rothstein as well as Dan Hurley's. And I'm super excited to see Brilen hoop for UConn this upcoming season. Now, to get into, I guess, the next point that Jon Rothstein got into was the one surprise guy at UConn practice was Jalen Stewart. John Rothstein mentioned that Jalen Stewart looks way more assertive with the ball in his hands, very aggressive offensively. And honestly, that kind of plays into how I felt Jalen Stewart was going to attack this offseason. I've talked about how I feel that after kind of coming on late in the rotation his freshman season in the course of Big East tournament play and in the NCAA tournament, there was a lot of hype that kind of surrounded Jalen Stewart's name going into this past offseason. A lot of people kind of banked on him being the guy to make the leap over Solo Ball. Not to brag or anything, I came out and said I believed Solo Ball was going to be one of the main guys for this last year's UConn team, and I think that panned out pretty well, that prediction. But I definitely thought that Jalen Stewart was kind of the boat where, hey, I've been coming off the bench for the past 2 years in my first 2 seasons of college basketball. I have a chance to start. It's all for the taking. That's what Dan Hurley said. Jalen Stewart, in his post-season kind of recap video he did with Store Central on Instagram. It's definitely an account worth checking out if you are a UConn basketball fan. He came out and said that Dan Hurley told him, hey, this next year, it's all for the taking. It's up to you if you want it or if you don't. At UConn, you got to earn a starting spot, and I definitely think there's going to be a really big competition to see who lands that starting spot at the 3. I think for the most part, the starting lineup is pretty much finalized at the point, shooting guard, power forwards, center spots. I mean, I think it's pretty safe to say Silas Demery will start the point guard. Solo Ball is obviously going to start the 2. The 3, again, up for the debate. Caravan will obviously start the 4, and Terrace Reed will he'll definitely be the starting 5. But yeah, that leaves a lot of room for debate. Dan Hurley came out and said he was asked if he thinks Brilen Mullins can start, and Dan Hurley said, yeah, Brilen Mullins definitely can start for us. He's got all the tools to do it, but he's got to earn it. And that's what it is at UConn. No one's given anything. You need to earn a starting spot. And I think Jalen Stewart and Brilen Mullins, to even throw Jacob Furphy into the mix with how well he played in the U19 World Cup, Dan Hurley alluded to him being really good in practice. I did see a few clips. He was a little turnover prone, but I think he's still kind of adjusting to the college speed. And consider he just was playing in that World Cup, probably took some time to kind of ease back into the groove of things at UConn practice and STORRS. But it's a 3-way race. I would definitely say between those 3 guys. I will say I do think it is a lot more even now between Jalen Stewart and Brilen Mullins than I initially thought. I know I've been vocal about how I think Jalen Stewart will be the starting wing at the 3 spot this upcoming season, but definitely hearing the praise from both Rothstein and Dan Hurley about what Brilen Mullins brings to the table definitely makes it very interesting. I think Jalen Stewart brings a little bit better size. He has the experience of being in the program for going on to his 3rd season here. And I do think that he does possess, pure score 3-level guy attributes in terms of what he brings to the table. I think he defends at a high level too. At his peak, you look back to what he did against Eric Dixon against Villanova several times this year, as well as in certain spots throughout the season, made some nice glue guy plays in the later stretches of the year. And I'm really excited to see who comes out on top in that kind of match for the last starting spot. I honestly don't think you could really go wrong either way. I think both guys bring really unique skill sets to the table. Dan Hurley talked about how Brilen kind of possesses that ability to kind of fill that sort of Liam McNeely, Cam Spencer type of role. I think same thing goes with Jalen Stewart. I would lean towards Jalen and being the better defender of the 2, in all honesty, just because of the more added length and size Stewart brings. But overall, I'm really excited to see how that pans out. And I'm glad to hear Jalen Stewart is killing it in practice. Glad to hear Rothstein report that Jalen Stewart deserves a lot of shouts there. But to get into what else Rothstein had mentioned, he'd also said that he believes that this squad has a chance to go 10 deep. He thinks UConn has a legit 10-man rotation. The question is to whether or not Dan Hurley chooses to kind of play 10 people in the dog days of Big East play, where you really get into it in conference. The Big East is no joke, as always. This year, a little bit of down here, but as you saw, UConn can still drop some games to teams they probably shouldn't, like a Seton Hall, like a Xavier on the road, where you probably had a chance to win that game, like a St. John's at home, where, again, St. John's won the Big East this year, but they definitely could have won one at Gamble Pavilion if they don't blow that lead that they took early on. But overall, that is definitely interesting to think about, just considering that there are definitely 10, possibly 12 guys that are very, very playable on this roster. It's just really a matter of how willing are you to kind of turn to some of your less experienced guys. Like, again, a Brilen Mullins who might be in a starting role, but might not be used to playing in tight spots. Of course, his first year of college basketball. Same thing goes with Jacob Furphy, Eric Riba. You're also bringing in Alec Molender, Dwayne Caroma. We don't really fully know how those guys are going to fit into the mix just yet. Jacob Ross as well, along with Jaden Ross, who's another unknown X factor, I think, for this team. If he can provide that 3-and-D potential that I've talked about so much on this podcast through the course of this past season, then I think that's going to be really, really beneficial for the program. We'll see if he can come along and kind of get to that point. But I will say overall, I think having the question of if you are willing to go 10 deep or not in the, again, dog days of Big East play where it's getting grueling, it's physical, I think that's a good problem to have, just considering that this UConn team lacked depth this past season. And quite honestly, the team before that too, that won the national championship, the one that, a lot of people consider best team of all time, that wasn't a deep team either. Realistically, they went 7 deep with Sampson and Hassan off the bench. Of times they turned Jalen Stewart very minimally solo ball. But really, it was a 7-man rotation. The year before that, they were very, very deep. And I've talked about how I feel this team going to this next season, very reminiscent of what it was going into the 22 preseason. Granted, I think this team is being looked at with a higher evaluation than the 22-23 team did going into their respective seasons. But I think the depth this year is a lot better than what it was this past season. I think the roster construction makes a lot more sense. And I think you can kind of sort of envision the roles guys are going to be playing. But definitely a good problem to have, whether you go 10 deep or not. And I'm really excited to see how the depth on this year's roster plays out. Now, to get into the next mention of something John Rossi noticed, mentioned that Alex Karaban seems to have added some size to his frame. Now, I don't necessarily know if that's something Alex Karaban really needed to do, but Rossi came out and was pretty public. He's visibly bigger. So have added some size to his frame. Again, I don't know if that's necessarily a guy that really needed to focus in so much on that. But I do think overall, Dan Hurley in his media availability did talk about how the weight room has been a huge emphasis this offseason, just because they felt that they kind of got pushed around in the Big East this past season, which, again, super physical conference like I've talked about in this video. UConn needs to be ready for it this year. They can't get punched in the face the way they did this past season. But guys like Solo Ball, Jalen Stewart, Jaden Ross, guys like that, Dan Hurley has really emphasized in adding mass to their frames and just being ready and building their bodies up to be, again, ready for a very physical in-conference season in the Big East, where St. John's, they've gotten bigger. The likes of Georgetown, Providence, sure, Marquette, Shaka Smart over there is loading up. Creighton has reloaded too. There's big guards in the Big East as per usual. UConn needs to be ready for that. They can't get pushed around the way they did last year. I think Terrace Reed is going to be a huge factor in that, in what I would assume a starting role at the 5 spot would be, where we need Kodiak Terrace this season. No mentions of really Terrace by John Rothstein, nor Dan Hurley, which interesting. I'm curious to see as to how far Terrace is kind of coming along. He's someone who I've been vocal about how I could see him being like an Adama for this year's team. And I think he's going to be so crucial in being able to win the battles on the glass every night, which he did when he was at his peak this past season. But going back to AK, I guess adding some ass is never a bad thing. Just hope it doesn't hurt the shooting too much. But overall, I think that's good. He's already a really solid rebounder. I'm sure adding more size is definitely going to help with that as well. And just being able to set better ghost screens. So I think that'll be good. And then the last thing John Rothstein had mentioned was that there's a lot better size in the backcourt this year with Silas Demery. Legit size, 6'5". He's around 200 pounds. Similar to Tristan Noonan. I think he's a little bit of a more filled frame than T-New was. But again, I think that was the important thing. That's what Dan Hurley likes, a bigger guard who's able to run UConn's offense from right behind the three-point line. They can back down their defenders all the way there and not run their sets from so far out the way they did this past season. So I think Silas should be able to handle that no problem whatsoever. And just to kind of parallel off that point, Dan Hurley kind of talked about how they almost have 4 functional point guards on this year's roster between Silas, who will be the starter, and then Malachi Smith, who Dan Hurley had a lot of great things to say Malachi Smith. Of course, he's kind of battling that injury right now in his foot. I forget if it's toe, ankle, knee, but he's talked about how Malachi is a really talented guy off the dribble, I should say. Can do a lot offensively, can do some of the junkyard stuff Hassan did defensively. Of course, he's going to draw the parallels to Hassan being that kind of like 6th man off the bench coming from New York City. The parallels are already there. I'm really excited to see Malachi play. Dan Hurley had a lot of good things to say about him. I'm super excited to see how he kind of fits into the fold there. But again, those 2 guys can obviously run the point whenever each of them are on the floor. On top of that, I've heard really good things about Alec Molender, a guy who was a late transfer portal ad from IU Indianapolis. Really kind of advertised as a knockdown shooter, shot 40% from three this past year for that program. But in the practice clips I've seen, he's done a really good job handling the ball. Dan Hurley came out and said that Alex done well in that role in practice. Same thing goes with Jacob Furphy. You look at what he did in the U19 World Cup, where he was handling the ball, hitting step back threes, making the right reads, passes. There's four functional guys, so I think at any point in a game, if you need to turn to them, they're going to be able to bring the ball up the court, run UConn's offense. And I'm super excited to have that, because last year you really didn't have anyone outside of Hassan who could have. And to have that depth where you have three, maybe four guys even who are able to execute UConn's offense, I think that's so important and crucial for the success of this year's program. And they're in a lot better of a spot than they were last year in terms of that and having point guards. But overall, outside of that, Hurley talked a little bit about, or at least he was asked about solo ball and kind of where he's improved over the course of this offseason and what the main things that they want to nail down with solo with and how they attack this offseason, what they want to improve him in. And he talked about how, hey, you need to realize solo ball is one of the best, if not the best, returning shooters in the country in college basketball and going into this year. I mean, he shot mid 40s from three on high volume. As we know, solo ball really only shot 3-pointers this past season. And they were tough. They were shots with a high degree of difficulty. I know it dipped down. He had a little bit of a rougher stretch towards the end of the season, especially in Big East NCAA tournament play, shooting from outside. But again, if he can get back to his Big East play version of himself, where he's shooting that high clip from three on high volume, where he's taking like 7-8 threes a game the way he was this past year, then I think that's huge. And he's also talked about how solo, the main thing for him this offseason was improving in rim pressure, his ball handle, as well as defense and being able to play, make, pass to get others open looks, which is all things that everyone, including myself, has been super vocal about where solo needs to improve this offseason. It sounds every bit the part that solo has done work to improve in all aspects of the game. So I think that's really good to hear. I've came out and said that I've seen several clips where solo looks like his timing and anticipation defensively has gotten a lot better. That's the number one thing I think he needs to improve in defensively. I think he has all the tools to be a great defender. And then, yeah, I mean, on top of that, just offensively, just considering the athleticism he brings to the table, I definitely think he's going to be able to put a lot more pressure on the rim this year and get in the paint. Getting those paint touches is going to be so crucial for UConn. And I think Solo's going to be able to rise up, maybe put a few guys on posters this year. At least I hope. I definitely think he's more than capable of it. But improving the ball handle and playmaking, I think will being a true combo guard, I think is going to do so much for this year's UConn team. He possesses that kind of Jordan Hawkins ability to come off of screens and just get 3-point shots off quick and hit them. And it's a really unique skill set he possesses there. Not many guys are able to do that in college basketball. UConn's lucky enough to have had two of them over the course of the last 5 years in Hawkins and now Solo. But yeah, I mean, everything seems to be going pretty well in STORRS. I'm excited to see how the starting lineup rounds out. Of course, the debate between Mullins and Stewart will continue. I've been pro Stewart this entire time. It's honestly up in the air now. I really don't know who Dan Hurley will turn to on opening night. But I'm really excited for this UConn team. I think more and more, the closer we get, the excitement just continues to go through the roof. The out-of-conference schedule, I mean, it's loaded. It's a gauntlet. Definitely see the video I made a while back now if you haven't already. But again, if they're able to prove to the country that they're capable of beating some of these Final Four national championship contenders, then UConn's in a great spot. Not really sure as to where they start in the preseason poll. Me and Josh have them as a 7th team in our personal crossover U poll going into the year. I've seen them as high as 4. But yeah, I definitely think they're probably somewhere in that 4 to 10 range. And personally, I think 7's a good spot for them, but we'll see. I'm not against them being higher to start in the poll. And I think they have a lot more evidence of being worth a top 5 preseason poll pick than they did last year, just concerning roster makeup. But overall, I'm hyped. I'm excited. I'm pumped. It should be a really, really good year in STORRS, Connecticut. And I hope injuries are not a concern this year. Everyone stays healthy through camp. Malachi gets healthy and ready to go. And hey, I'm here for the ride. I'm really excited. As usual, not too much going on in UConn basketball right now. So I'll try to keep you guys updated if anything else comes out. But until the next episode, I'll see you all next time.